Love is a many splendid things. Love is unconditional. Love is absolute. Love is forgiving. But love is unforgivingly, unconditionally, and absolutely blind. And so our story begins with the White Wolf, Geralt of Rivia, traveling the path as he has for many years, with only Roach, his trusty mare, to keep him company. On the horizon, a murder of crows was dancing in the pale mist. He halted for a moment to watch the black birds continue their ominous dance before spurring the mare off the main road. "We'll go a little out of our ways, Roach," he said. "We'll take a detour from the highway. I don't think the birds are circling there for nothing." The mare obediently walked towards the dense forest that flanked the highway. Hidden behind the lush vegetation, laying parallel with the highway, lay the shallow ravine that stretched a little ways before ending in a quiet glade. Surrounded by a mess of tangled bushes and trees that hang their branches greedily across the clearing, were two corpses sprawled across the ground. The first corpse was in plain sight. A white, blood-stained sheepskin jacket and a matte blue dress contrasted sharply with the sunburned grass that dotted the yellowish dirt. He couldn't see the second corpse, but its location was fairly obvious. Like stone gargoyles, 3 wolves were sitting calmly on their haunches, watching the Witcher as he emerged from the shrubbery. The mare snorted and shook its head, and as if by command, one by one, the wolves padded lazily towards the thick overgrowth, glancing back at the newcomer with cold eyes. The Witcher waited for the wolves to leave before dismounting and walking slowly towards the second body, casting only a fleeting glance on the woman in the matte blue dress. Her throat and face were missing. The second victim was lying face down, a man dressed in a modest doublet. Geralt saw no need to turn the man over. Despite the numerous bite wounds inflicted by various forest dwellers that covered his sides and back, it was obvious to the Witcher that the man died of less natural causes. Dry droplets of blood that spotted the back and shoulders of the man's hay-colored doublet betrayed the real cause of death: a single blow to the back of the neck. The presence of a hefty leather purse hanging from the man's sword belt indicated that mere bandits or horse thieves were not responsible for cutting short the lives of these two. Reaching over, Geralt tore the purse off and item by item threw the contents on the grass. A tinderbox, a piece of chalk, sealing wax, a handful of silver coins, a folding shaving knife, a rabbit's ear, 3 keys, and a talisman with a phallic symbol. 2 letters written on canvas, much beyond readability, but the third, written on quality parchment, survived the rains of yesterday. It was a credit note made out by the Dwarf Bank in Muriel to a merchant called Rule Asper, or Aspen, for a modest sum of coin. Prompted by the contents of the banknote, the Witcher examined the man more closely and, as expected, he found a copper ring painfully constricting the dead man's bloated fingers. Depicted on the ring was a stylized helmet with a visor, 2 crossed swords, and an A rune engraved beneath them. Sign of the Armorer's Guild, no doubt. Leaving the man's rigid body, he went back to the woman in the matte blue dress. As he was turning the body over, something pricked him in the finger. A rose of the most peculiar deep blue color, withered and pressed flat, pinned to the back of the dress. Turning the body completely over and seeing the deep bite marks on the back of the young woman's neck confirmed the Witcher's suspicion. No wolf did this. Backing away from the corpse, he called for Roach and mounted the mare, not taking his eyes off the surrounding thicket. He rode the mare twice in a circle, leaning from the saddle and observing the ground before halting at the edge of the glade. "So, Roach," he said quietly, "the case is reasonably clear. The armor and the woman arrived on horseback from the direction of the forest. They were on their way home from Murviel because nobody carries an uncashed credit note for long. Why they were going this way and not following the highway, I don't know. But they were crossing the glade side by side, and then again, I don't know why, they both dismounted or fell from their horses. The armorer died instantly. The woman ran and then fell and died, and whatever attacked her, which didn't leave any tracks, dragged her along the ground with her throat in its teeth. The horses ran off. This happened 2 or 3 days ago." The mare snorted restlessly, reacting to the tone of his voice. "The thing which killed them," continued Geralt, watching the forest edge, "was neither a werewolf or a leshy. Neither would have listened so much for the scavengers. If there were swamps here, I'd say it was a kimimora or a viper, but there aren't any swamps here. Well, Roach, we're taking a roundabout route. We better check why this armorer and woman were riding through the forest and not along the highway. If we pass by ignoring such incidents, we won't ever earn enough for your oats, will we? The mare obediently moved forwards across the glade, carefully sidestepping hollows. Although it's not a werewolf, we won't be taking any risks. The Witcher continued, taking a bunch of dried monk shed from the saddlebags and hanging it by the bit. The mare snorted. Geralt unlaced his tunic a little and pulled out a medallion engraved with a wolf with barred jaws. The medallion, hanging on a silver chain, bobbed up and down and written to the horse's gait, sparkling in the sun's ray like mercury. When the mist finally settled, the sun was already high in the sky. From the top of a small hill, Geralt could see red bricks of an old watchtower baking in the warm sunlight. He spent the hours following his departure from the glade, riding along fading, long-forgotten forest paths that were once used by travelers who wanted to avoid the highway, periodically leaning from his saddle and examining the ground for tracks. Roach, the usually steadfast mare, was, ever since they cleared the glade, acting agitated and unruly, tossing her hair about and snorting at the slightest whisper the forest made. The heat must have been getting to her, thought Geralt to himself. The sun was reflecting off 1,000 oily, fleshy leaves which covered the thick shrubbery that grew over the abandoned path they were traveling. A mile has gone by and the path cleared up. The air was cooler here, yet the mare remained restless, so much that Geralt resorted to magic, casting the sign of Axia with the corresponding incantation before finally dismounting and leading the horse by the bridle. A short while later, after leading the mare down a mild slope, Geralt suddenly stopped. There was a wall in his path. Countless vines have found their way up the wall, crawling from the ground and reaching from tree branches. It was hard to make out where the wall ended and the forest began. The crumbling grey plaster was barely visible below the mess of thorns and stalks, but Geralt could clearly make out red bricks hidden beneath it. The same red bricks he saw earlier today. A drop of sweat rolled down the Witcher's back. He felt a tingle in the back of his neck and pressure in his temples. A strange sensation, yet all too familiar to him. He was being watched. He turned around smoothly and calmly as to not alarm his watcher. Standing in the shade of an elder tree up the slope the hedges climbed down from was a slender girl with raven black hair and a white dress that played with the wind. Her hand was resting on a tree trunk and the semblance of a smile danced upon her lips. "Greetings," exclaimed the Witcher. The mare snorted and stamped her hooves as the Witcher displayed a friendly gesture and took a step forward. The woman turned her pale face away from the Witcher, but her eyes, large and dark, followed the Witcher's every movement. She was no longer smiling. Geralt took another step forward and the girl ran down the slope. Running like a horse in full gallop, the girl darted through the shrubbery, her white dress flying, and disappeared in the depths of the forest. Walking back, his eyes scanning the forest for movement, the Witcher calmed the mare yet again with magic and started leading the horse by the bridle, wading through the thorny bushes as they followed the wall. After some while, he came across a sturdy gate. Spots of rust could be seen on the hinges and the bars that cut vertically across its bent metal frame. Visible behind the door was a courtyard and a fountain, and an old mansion with a red brick watchtower. After a moment of hesitation, Geralt touched the one remaining brass knocker. He immediately jumped back because, squeaking and clattering, the door swung open without warning, dragging heavily across the ground and sending dirt and gravel flying. When it stopped, all was yet again quiet. Pulling the hesitant mare behind him, Geralt entered what used to be a royally decorated courtyard. The gravel paths that cut through it were streaked with grass and weeds, and the turf that surrounded them were overgrown and corrupted with wild bushes and thorny vines. Wood scaffolding was mounted all along the walls. The bright red color of new bricks contrasted with the old cherry-colored bricks that dominated the inner walls. In the middle of the courtyard, surrounded by ruined flower beds, stood a rich fountain, now dry and lifeless, with a white stone dolphin depicted in full flight. The sizable estate ended with a large mansion. Nature has overtaken it, vines have found their way up its walls all the way to the roof, their thorns ripping away at the crumbling, damp-ruined plaster and flaking paint that covered the brown shutters and door. Looks like no one's home. He slid Roach's girdle over a stone post next to the gate and walked towards the overgrown fountain, not taking his eyes from the heavy wooden door of the mansion that for the moment remained shut. Hidden behind the fountain, growing amongst crumples of moss and yellowish grass, was a solitary rose bush. Overgrown and unkempt, the bush itself was unremarkable at best, but it was the color of the roses that made the bush so fascinating. Roses of the most peculiar deep blue color. Geralt gently caressed one of the indigo roses, admiring its rich color and healthy feel. It was at that moment when a loud racket made him jump back up again. Without warning or reason, the windows of the mansion flew open. The heavy wooden shutters slammed against the wall and suddenly came to life as they flapped open and closed, creating a terribly loud noise. The Witcher turned his head just in time to see the main door of the mansion fly open with a mighty thud, and a monster, running on all fours, charging at him in a wild frenzy. The Witcher reached for his sword, the blade hissing against the leather scabbard as he drew it, and tracing a luminous semicircle, he pointed the shiny steel towards the beast. Upon seeing the razor-sharp steel blade, the monster did something Geralt has rarely seen in his long career as a Witcher. Gravel spraying in all directions, the beast ground to a halt, stopping 10 feet from the Witcher and gazing at him with bloodshot eyes. The mansion came to life. The shutters and doors flew open and smacked terribly against the crumbling walls, and from the darkness within, running on all fours in a mad frenzy, a mountain of muscle and teeth was charging towards the Witcher. Faster than the eye can follow, the Witcher drew his blade and stood his ground. The tip of his luminous sword pointed towards the incoming beast. Gravel spraying in all directions, the monster ground to a halt. Stomping its enormous paws and standing up straight, it roared.
Flee, mortal men. I will devour you, tear you to pieces.
The creature was a bipedal humanoid, dressed in tattered clothes that, despite their age, still had an air of class to them. Decorated with various ornaments and useless details you would never find on a Witcher's jerkin. Standing at 4 heads taller than Geralt, the monster had a huge bear-like head looming above a broad, hairy chest, but curiously, judging by the human-sized legs and feet, its monstrous form extended from the waist up.
Are you deaf? Away with you!
Sneered the monster and released a bellowing roar that once again brought the mansion to life, its very walls shaking with uncontained fury. The Witcher stood still, his sword held high.
Clear off while you're still in one piece,
roared the creature, less sure of himself.
Because if you don't, then I'll...
Then what? Interrupted Geralt, gripping his sword more firmly. A fire-red tongue flopped out of the monster's mouth as it gasped and tilted its head in shock.
Look at him. Isn't he brave?
The creature rolled the word slowly over his long tongue.
Lower that iron, if you please. Perhaps you cannot realize you are in my courtyard. Or maybe it's customary, wherever you come from, to threaten people with swords in their own courtyards.
It's customary, nodded Geralt in agreement, when faced with people who greet their guests with a roar and the cry that they're going to tear you to pieces.
Box on it!
The creature spat and bared its fangs, enraged by Geralt's provocation.
And he'll insult me on top of it all, this strangler. A guest as he pushes his way into the yard, ruins someone else's flowers, plays the lords and thinks he'll be brought bread and salt. Bah!
Crossing his humongous paws over its chest, the creature glared at the Witcher. So? Spoke Geralt after a moment's silence, slowly lowering his sword. Are we going to carry on standing like this?
And what do you suggest instead? Lying down? Put that iron away, I said.
Snorted the monster, still glaring at the intruder with bloodshot eyes, yet the aggressive edge was absent from its tone. Slowly, deliberating every movement, Geralt slid the weapon into his scabbard and, without lowering his arm, stroked the hilt which rose above his shoulder. I'd prefer you not make any sudden movements, spoke the Witcher calmly. This sword can be drawn again, faster than you imagine.
I noticed,
rasped the Witcher through clenched fangs.
If it wasn't for that, you'd be out of this gate a long time ago, with my boot print up your ass. What do you want here? How did you get here?
I got lost, lied the Witcher instinctively.
You got lost,
repeated the monster and grinned horribly, exposing 2 rows of curved fangs that adorned its jaw.
Well, and lose your way. Out of the gate, turn your left ear to the sun and keep walking. You'll soon get back to the highway. Well, what are you waiting for?
Is there any water? Asked the Witcher calmly, gesturing at the mare by the gates. The horse is thirsty, and so am I, if this doesn't inconvenience you. Sweeping his bloodshot eyes over the Witcher's worn-out, road-tired figure, the monster shifted its weight.
Listen, you,
he said.
Are you really not frightened of me?
Should I be? The monster looked around, cleared his throat, and yanked up his baggy trousers.
Pox on it, what's the harm of a guest in the house? It's not every day I meet someone who doesn't run away or faint at the sight of me. All right then. If you're weary but honest wanderer, I invite you in. But if you're a brigand or a thief, then I warn you. This house does what I tell it. Within these walls I rule.
Lifting his hairy paw, the monster, with a flick of the wrist, prompted the mansion to not so gently open all of its shutters and doors, and the fountain to produce a strange, rumbling sound.
I invite you in.
Mirroring the crumbling exterior of the mansion, the long hallways and expansive rooms found inside have likewise succumbed to the passage of time. The ivory-colored tapestry that covered the walls of the hallways lost its charm. Faded and flaking, it was riddled by patches of mold and in places hung limply over the walkway. Appearing sporadically along the walls at Geralt's eye level, deep claw marks scarred the aging tapestry. Despite its pitiful state, the interior of the mansion was surprisingly tidy. The window panes were stain-free and allowed in a generous amount of sunlight. The floorboards were freshly scrubbed, and the little furniture that could be found, a couple of chairs and tables made by skillful craftsmen, were devoid of dust and dirt.
No doubt you would like to know whether I got 40 servants as beautiful as me. Well, I don't.
Spoke the beast as they were climbing a decorated staircase. The Witcher's medallion swung on its chain.
What's that around your neck, dear guest?
Have a look. Taking it in its paw, the host turned the medallion over and examined it.
The animal has an unpleasant expression. What is it?
Asked the monster, lifting the shiny medallion up to his eyes. It's my guild's badge.
Ah, you make muzzles, no doubt. This way, please. Light!
The shout echoed through the mansion and woke up whatever power rested within. The dormant torches that hang from the walls came to life, a bright flame burning strongly within the iron brackets. Not bad, remarked the Witcher. The monster cackled.
That's it? I see you won't be amazed by any old trick. I told you, this house obeys my commands. This way, please.
The middle of the dark, windowless room was taken up by a huge oak table, devoid of decorations and adorned only by a single brass candlestick. At the monster's command, the candles lit and flickered a tiny flame, far too weak to light up the spacious room. Further back, across from the door, an enormous fireplace was laying dormant. Stretching along the wall, above it were a series of old, flaking portraits depicting men with less than noble faces. One of the side walls was heavily adorned with all sorts of shields and bulwarks. Some were simple round wooden shields, and others were masterfully crafted works of metal, wood, and hide, but they all showed their age. The crests depicted on them have faded, and metal rims and spikes were spotted with rust. The same deterioration was present on the weapons and armor pieces that covered the opposite wall. Maces, axes, mauls, swords, and spears were hanging alongside full sets of plate armor and simpler leather jerkins and mail vests. Flanking the doors on both sides were various hunting trophies, elks and stags whose large antlers stretched menacingly over the heads of wild boars, brown bear, and lynxes. Nestled between the ruffled and frayed wings of an eagle and sparrowhawk, holding the center place of honor was a raw dragon's head, tainted brown, damaged and leaking stuffing. Geralt examined it more closely.
My grandpa killed it,
said the monster, lighting the fireplace with the flick of his wrist.
It was probably the last one in the vicinity when it got itself killed.
The monster gestured at the ornate oak chair.
Sit, dear guest. Are you hungry?
I won't deny it, dear host. The monster sat at the table, lowered its head, clasped its hairy paws over its stomach, muttered something while twiddling its enormous thumbs, then suddenly roared and clobbered the table with an open paw. Smacking and clattering about, dishes and plates, forks and cups appeared on the table, spreading the sweet aroma of roast meat, garlic, nutmeg, and lemon. Geralt didn't show any surprise.
Yes.
The monster rubbed its hand.
This is better than servant, isn't it? Help yourself, dear guest. This is proper, real food, don't worry.
Reaching over, Geralt took a roasted fowl and tore it in half. I'm not worried, he said, biting the succulent breast meat.
I forgot,
Chuckled the monster.
that you're not timid. What shall I call you?
Geralt, and your name, dear host?
Nivellen, but they call me Dagon or Fanger around here, and they use me to frighten children.
The monster again cackled at its own expense, emptying an enormous chalice and proceeding to devour half a bowl of terrine in one go. Frighten children, repeated Geralt with his mouth full. Without any reason, no doubt.
Of course not. You're held, Geralt.
Exclaimed the monster and rose a cup, eyeing his guest. And yours, Nivellen? The Witcher drank heavily from the brass chalice, the bittersweet wine flowing smoothly down his throat. After a moment's silence between bites and gulps, Geralt spoke. Are your magical powers innate? The monster looked up from the remains of a small pig.
No, I've had him since growing this trap, that is. I don't know how it happened myself, but the house does whatever I wish. Nothing very big. I can conjure food, drink, clothes, clean linen, hot water, soap. Any woman can do that, and without using magic at that. It's nothing very remarkable.
It is something, and this trap, as you call it, have you had it for long?
12 years.
How did it happen? Asked the Witcher casually, as if talking whether the corn has grown.
What's it got to do with you? Pour yourself some wine, dear guest.
The monster grumbled and waved its arm, and with a splash and a gulp, the pots were refilled with fresh wine. With pleasure. It's got nothing to do with me, I'm just asking out of curiosity. The monster stopped mid-bite and glared at the Witcher for a second, fresh fat hanging from its furry chin.
An acceptable reason,
He suddenly laughed loudly and smacked the table with his paw.
but I don't accept it. It's got nothing to do with you, and that's that.
Said the monster decisively.
But to satisfy your curiosity a little, I'll show you what I used to look like. Look at those portraits. The first from the chimney is my father, the second box only knows, and the third is me. Can you see it?
Looking down from the painting, through layers of dust and cobwebs, a sick-looking, spotty-faced, bloated man was miserably looking back at Geralt. The Witcher, who was no stranger to the way painters tended to flatter their clients, simply nodded.
Can you see it?
Repeated Nivellen, baring his fangs. I can,
Who are you?
growled the monster. I don't understand, Geralt replied, innocently taking a shallow sip from a chalice.
You don't understand.
The monster raised his head, the gentle candlelight reflecting of his cat eyes. My portrait is hanged beyond the candlelight.
I can see it, but I'm not human, at least not at the moment. A human, looking at my portrait, would get up, go closer, and no doubt have to take a candlestick with them. You didn't do that, so the conclusion is simple. But I'm asking you plainly, are you human?
The Witcher, not paying much mind to Nivellen as he spoke, kept twirling the crystal chalice, admiring how the light danced off the golden-plated rim. If that's the way you put it, pausing for a second, looking up from the exquisite chalice and gazing back at his host. Not quite.
Ah, surely it won't be tactless if I ask in that case, what are you?
A Witcher,
Ah,
repeated Nivellen after a moment's silence.
if I remember rightly, witchers earn their living in an interesting way. They kill monsters.
The host sneered the last words out through clasped jaws and leaned back on the table, intertwining his large fingers. You remember correctly. The Witcher mirrored his host's movement, leaning on the table, his cat-like eyes shining in the dim candlelight. Like heavy wool curtains, silence fell on the room. Nothing moved but the flickering flame of a candle, casting wild shadows on two statue-like figures with shining eyes. Molten wax slowly dripped on the brass candlestick. Nivelin sat upright, his hairy eyes twitching lightly.
Let's assume,
He gestured at the Witcher.
that you draw your sword before I jump on you. Let's assume you even manage to cut me down. With my weight, that won't stop me. I'll take you down through sheer momentum, and then it's teeth that'll decide. What do you think, Witcher? Which one of us has a better chance if it comes to biting each other's throat?
The Witcher absent-mindedly reached for a wooden flagon. He unstoppered it and slowly poured himself some wine. He took a modest sip before leaning back in the heavy chair. He looked at the monster with a smile, an exceptionally ugly one. In an old crumbling mansion hidden deep within a forest, in a dark, windowless room found within, lit only by a flickering flame of a candle, two monsters found themselves face to face. Geralt the Witcher and Nivelin, once a man. Engulfed in dark and quiet, with a large oak table filled with various dishes and drinks between them, they sat motionlessly, returning each other's gaze.
Let's assume,
Nivelin spoke and broke the silence.
that you draw your sword before I jump on you. Let's assume you even manage to cut me down. With my weight, that won't stop me. I'll take you down through sheer momentum, and then it's teeth that'll decide. What do you think, Witcher? Which one of us has a better chance when it comes to biting each other's throat?
The Witcher played with a cork stopper while Nivelin spoke, slowly reaching for a wooden flagon and pouring himself some wine. He took a sip, leaned back in his chair, and looked back at the monster with a smile. An exceptionally ugly smile.
Yes.
Breathed the monster, likewise leaning back in his chair and stroking his hairy chin with a curved claw.
One has to admit, you can answer a question without using many words. It'll be interesting how you manage the next one. Who sent you?
No one. I'm here by accident.
You're not lying by any chance?
I'm not in the habit of lying. The Witcher spoke clearly and confidently, taking another sip from his golden chalice. There was no response from the monster, only a frown of his brow, and the quiet sound of a claw scratching fur as he observed Geralt from across the table.
And what are you in the habit of doing?
The monster spoke offhandedly between stuffing its maw.
I've heard about witchers. They abduct tiny children whom they feed with magic herbs. The ones that survive become witchers themselves, sorcerers with inhuman powers. They're taught to kill, and all human feelings and reactions are trained out of them. They're turned into monsters in order to kill other monsters. I've heard it said it's high time someone started hunting witchers, as there's fewer and fewer monsters and more witchers. Do have some partridge before it's completely cold.
Nivelin took the stuffed bird from a dish and threw it in his open jaws. Effortlessly, he crunched the bird, bones and all, and swallowed it after giving it a few chews. Fresh grease decorated his dark fur.
Why don't you say anything?
He said, wiping grease from his chin.
How much of the rumors about you witchers is true?
Practically nothing.
And what's a lie?
That there are fewer and fewer monsters. A dry laugh escaped the monster's jaw.
True, there's a fair number of them. One is sitting in front of you, wondering if he did the right thing by inviting you in. I didn't like your guild badge from the start, dear guest.
You aren't a monster, Nivelin, the Witcher said dryly.
Pox on it, that's something new,
said the monster incredulously, grabbing the sides of the heavy oaken table in his large paws and leaning forward.
So, what am I? Cranberry pudding? A flock of wild geese flying south on a sad November morning? No, maybe I'm the virtue that a miller's buxom daughter lost in the spring. Well, Geralt, tell me, what am I? Can't you see I'm shaking with curiosity?
The massive table looked quite feeble in Nivelin's powerful grip. You're not a monster. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to touch this silver tray, and in no way could you hold my medallion. The silver medallion that hung from the Witcher's neck glistened in the dim candlelight.
Ha!
Nivelin threw back his head and unleashed a bellowing combination of a hearty laugh and an animal roar.
Today, very clearly, is the day of revealing great and terrible secrets. Now I'm going to be told I grew these ears because I didn't like milk and porridge as child.
No, Nivellen. Despite Nivellen's provocations, the Witcher remained calm. It happened because of a spell. I'm sure you know who cast that spell.
And what if I do?
In many cases, spells can be uncast.
And you, as a Witcher, can uncast spells in many cases.
I can. Do you want me to try? With the table still held firmly in his paws, the monster cocked his head to the side and with a smile spoke.
No, I don't.
He let his fire-red, 2-span-long tongue hang loosely from his grinning maw.
Surprised you, hasn't it?
That it has, admitted Geralt, politely containing his curiosity for the moment. The monster giggled and lounged in his armchair.
I knew that would. Pour yourself some more, get comfortable, and I'll tell you the whole story. Witcher or not, you've got an honest face and I feel like talking.
Warmed by wine and satiated by food, the Witcher and the monster sat and talked. Nivellen began his story by telling Geralt of his family business.
As no doubt you've noticed,
He began, pouring them some more wine.
this is quite a remote area. It's a long way to the nearest human settlement. It's because, you see, my father, and my grandfather too in his time, didn't make themselves particularly loved by our neighbors or the merchants using the highway. If anyone went astray here and my father spotted them from the tower, they'd lost at best their fortune.
A high-born family turned common brigands, Geralt thought to himself, nothing he hasn't heard of before. Continuing his story, Nivellen told how he, following his father's close encounter with a bastard sword, found himself the leader of the gang.
I was young at the time,
He said, absent-mindedly tapping on the armrest.
a real milksop, so the lads in the crew wound me up around their little fingers in a flash. I'll spare you the details and get straight to the point. One day we took ourselves as far as Gilbot, near Mert, and robbed a temple. A young priestess was there too.
The Witcher knew all too well what happens to young priestesses in desecrated temples. Which temple, Nivellen?
A bad one. There were skulls and bones at the altar, I remember, and a green fire was burning. It stank like nobody's business, but to the point. The lads overpowered the priestess and stripped her, then said I had to become a man. Well, I became a man, stupid little snot that I was, and while I was achieving manhood, the priestess spat in my face and screamed something.
What? Asked Geralt.
That I was a monster in human skin, that I'll be a monster in monster skin, something about love, blood, I can't remember. She had a little dagger hidden in her hair. She killed herself and then we fled from there. It was a bad temple.
The monster fell quiet for a moment, gazing at the solitary candle, the flicker of the flame reflecting off his shiny eyes. Go on, prompted the Witcher quietly.
Then it was as the priestess said.
He downed an entire cup of wine and slammed it angrily on the table. He poured himself another and proceeded to explain how, a few days later, he woke up. The servants screamed and took to the heels at the sight of him.
You see, Geralt, I panicked, had some sort of an attack. To put it briefly, corpses fell. Several corpses. Whoever could get out ran away in panic. I was roaring, howling, going mad, smashing whatever came to hands, mainly mirrors.
Nivellen paused, sighed, and sniffed.
When the attack was over, it was already too late. I was alone. I was just a stupid youngster, sobbing over the servants' bodies in an empty manor.
Nivellen proceeded to tell the Witcher how, for a very long time, he sat in the manor, quiet as a mouse. Months have passed, and every now and again a stray traveler or merchant would stumble his way in his yard, rummage about, but Nivellen remained locked up in the manor, shunning all company and visitors. One day he looked out the window. More trespassers. A fat old man, merchant most like. Nivellen had no intentions of leaving the safety of the manor until he saw the merchant commit a grave transgression. He plucked a rose, a beautiful blue rose from a bush behind the fountain. This act of thievery made him fly into a blind fury and he jumped outside.
The fat trespasser,
said the monster,
lost it when he saw me, squealed that he only wanted a few flowers for his daughter. I was just ready to kick him out of the main gate when I remembered something. Stories Lenka, my nanny, the old bag, used to tell me.
Nivellen chuckled softly before continuing.
If pretty girls turn frogs into princess, or the other way around, then maybe there's a grain of truth in those stories. I leapt 4 yards and roared so loud wild wine tumbled from the wall, and I yelled, "Your daughter or your life!" Nothing better came to mind. The merchant began to weep, then confessed his daughter was only 8.
The Witcher suppressed a cackle, not wanting to insult his guest further.
I didn't know whether to laugh or cry over my shitty fate. I felt sorry for the old trader. I invited him inside, made him welcome, and when he was leaving, I poured gold and precious stones in his bag. There was still a fair fortune left. I hadn't quite known what to do with it, so I could allow myself this small gesture. The merchant thanked me so profusely that he slobbered all over himself. He must have boasted about his adventure somewhere, because not 2 weeks had gone by when another merchant appeared. He had a large bag ready with him, and a daughter, also pretty large.
Nivellen extended his legs under the table and stretched until the armchair creaked. He told the Witcher how he quickly came to an agreement with the merchant, a sack of gold and precious stones for a year of company.
At first, the girl was frightened to death. She had fits at the sight of me for a while. She really thought I'd eat her.
The monster said in an amused voice and continued. The poor girl got used to the sight of him and soon after his company. He talked of pleasant meals spent together and long walks filled with chatter, but their acquaintance went no further.
You see, Geralt, I was always shy with girls, even with wenches from cowsheds with tongue up to the knees. The year dragged like stench following marauding troops until, at last, the merchant arrived and took her away.
In the dim candlelight, the Witcher could see a flash of sadness in the monster's eyes.
I locked myself in the house and didn't react for several months to any of the guests who turned up with daughters.
Continued Nivellen in a less mournful tone.
But after a year spent with company, I realized how hard it was to live without anyone to talk to.
The monster made a noise which resembled a drawn-out sigh and continued with his story. Geralt listened to the monster recount his temporary housemates with great interest. After the shy one came Fen, a lovely small bundle of energy, a real Goldcrest. Unlike the one that came before her, Fen was not frightened by Nivellen's monstrous appearance, and one warm summer night, after several flagons of mead, the monster and the beauty wound up in bed.
Straight after, I jumped out of bed and ran to the mirror. I must admit, I was disappointed. The trap was the same as it ever was, if with a slightly more stupid expression.
He chuckled sadly at his own expense and downed another glass of wine.
And they say wisdom of ages is to be found in fairy tales. It's not worth shit, wisdom like that, Geralt.
After Fen, the beautiful swallow, came Primula, the daughter of a poor, skinny knight that stank to high heaven and resembled a sack of rotten potatoes. Primula shared her predecessor's open-minded views and embraced Nivellen with open arms.
After 2 weeks, Primula and I already had a very close relationship,
he said, chuckling like a child talking about cooties.
She liked to pull me by the ears and shout, "Bite me to death, you animal, and tear me to pieces, you beast," and other equally idiotic things. I ran to the mirror in the breaks, but just imagine, Geralt. I looked at myself with growing anxiety.
Wiping the wine off his whiskers, Nivellen rested his hands on his stomach.
Less and less did I long to return to my former shape. You see, Geralt, I used to be a weakling, and now I'm a strapping fellow. I'd keep getting ill, I'd cough and my nose would run, but now I don't catch anything. And my teeth, you wouldn't believe how rotten my teeth had been. And now, I can bite through a leg of a chair.
Reaching to his right, the monster effortlessly lifted a spare chair and waved it about.
Do you want me to bite through a leg of a chair?
With a large grin on his face, the Witcher shook his head. No, I don't. The monster further told Geralt that after Primula came only 2 more year-long partners, Ilka and Venimira. The pattern that started with Primula repeated itself to the point of boredom. First came a mixture of fear and reserve, then a threat of sympathy, and then bite me, eat me up. Yet Nivellen remained as he was, unchanged and slowly growing weary of this yearly charade. After his last goodbye with his final partner, Nivellen accepted his fate and came to peace with what he was. Nothing needed changing. Really? No changes, Nivellen? Asked the Witcher.
It's true. I have a horse's health, which came with the way I look. Secondly, my being different works on girls like an aphrodisiac. And thirdly, safety. Father had enemies, and a couple of them survived. There's gold in the cellar. If it wasn't for the fear inspired by me, somebody would have come and get it, if only peasants with pitchforks.
Throwing a clean bird wing on the ever-growing pile of bird carcasses, Geralt stretched his legs and relaxed. But you suspected someone had paid me to kill you. Who would have?
A scoundrel who wanted the contents of my cellar, but didn't have any more daughters.
Nivellen said emphatically.
Human greed knows no limits.
They both remained silent, contemplating the violent nature of the human race until, just as the candle had run out of wick, Geralt spoke. Nivellen, said the Witcher quietly, are you alone now?
Witcher,
answered the monster after a moment's hesitation.
I think that, in principle, I ought to insult you, take you by the neck and throw you down the stairs. Do you know why? Because you treat me like a dimwit. I noticed you've been cocking your ears and glancing at the door. You know perfectly well that I don't live alone. Am I right?
You are. I'm sorry.
Pox on your apologies. Have you seen her?
Yes, in the forest by the gate. Is she why the merchants and the daughters have been leaving empty-handed here for some time? The memory of the deceased couple in the meadow flashed before the Witcher's eyes.
So you know about that too? Yes, she's the reason.
Do you mind if I ask whether, with a gesture of his large, furry paw, Nivellen interrupted the Witcher?
Yes, I do mind.
Silence fell on them again. Oh well, it's up to you, the Witcher finally said, getting up. Thanks for your hospitality, dear host. It is time I was on my way.
Quite right.
Nivellen also got up.
For certain reasons, I can't offer you a room in the manor for the night, and I don't encourage you to spend the night in these woods. Ever since the area's been deserted, it's been bad at night here.
Whoever fights monsters should see to that in the process he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you. Geralt wandered around the deserted patch of forest for a long time, not really looking for anything, just letting Roach take him where she takes him. His mind was likewise wandering. His conversations with Nivellen, the couple lying dead in the meadow, the wondrous indigo roses in the courtyard, and the elusive arena. All of it was connected, yet he felt something was off. Nivellen did not strike him as someone who would go out of his way to track down and hunt an old man and a young girl just for the sin of walking on his grass or plucking a rose. Not all monsters are truly monstrous. The sun was sinking rapidly towards the horizon. Night will soon be upon them. Cover was abundant in the old forest, but Geralt chose a clearing atop a barren hill to spend the night. Kneeling beside the campfire with his sword resting on his lap, Geralt rested, with the mare sleeping quietly to his right. In the black of night, his eyes caught a glimmer of light. A small campfire down in the valley. Before long, the quiet forest air was filled with distant echoes of singing, shouting, and hysterical laughter, when suddenly a blood-chilling scream pierced the night and ended the merry festival. The woman's screams of agony continued for a while before ending abruptly. Geralt didn't sleep that night. Come morning, Geralt made his way down the valley. He found nothing but cold remains of bonfire and trampled grass. He didn't stick around for long, spurring the mare north towards the highway. Roach seemed on edge this morning, walking faster than usual and throwing her head around, so their progress was hardly hindered by the thick, overgrown bushes that covered the forest ground. They emerged on the highway at the point where it turned away from a small river and continued west towards Temeria. Geralt dismounted and walked over towards the quiet stream, with Roach following closely behind. Kneeling on the muddy shore, he went to refill his leather water flask when Roach neighed loudly and stomped her feet. Turning to face the unruly mare, Geralt said, "You're becoming quite a hysteric, Roach." Yet he knew animal instincts greatly surpassed that of a human. Out of the corner of his eyes, he could see something floating down the stream. Stuck together by the river's current, bundled like stacks of hay, dark patches consisting of dozens of dead fishes were dotting the stream. His eyes fixated on the glare of shiny scales, absent-mindedly scratching his beard. "Animals like me," he muttered to himself quietly. Suddenly, he stood back up and mounted the mare. "Sorry, Roach, it turns out you got more brains than me." He yet again spurred the mare, this time leaning out of the saddle and following their own footprints. The mare flattened her ears against her skull and snorted, throwing up earth with her hooves. She didn't want to go. Geralt didn't calm her with the sign. He jumped out of the saddle and threw the reins over the horse's head. He no longer had his old sword and its lizard skin sheet on his back. Its place was filled with a shining, beautiful weapon with a circumform and slender, well-weighted hilt ending in a spherical pommel made of white metal. This time the gate didn't open for him. It was already open, just as he had left it. He heard singing. He didn't understand the words. He couldn't even identify the language, yet he didn't need to. The Witcher felt and understood the very nature, the essence of this quiet, piercing song which flowed through the veins in a wave of nauseous, overpowering menace. The singing broke off abruptly, and then he saw her. She was clinging to the back of the dolphin in the dried-up fountain, embracing the moss-overgrown stone with her tiny hands, so pale they seemed transparent. Beneath her storm of tangled black hair shone huge, wide-open eyes the color of anthracite. Geralt slowly drew closer, his step soft and springy, tracing the semicircle from the wall on the blue rosebush. The creature glued to the dolphin's back followed him with her eyes, turning her petite face with an expression of longing and full of charm. He could still hear her song, even though her thin, pale lips were held tight and not the slightest sound emerged from them. The Witcher halted at a distance of 10 paces. His sword, slowly drawn from his black, enameled sheath, glistened and glowed above his head. "It's silver," he said. "The blade is silver." The pale little face did not flinch. The anthracite eyes did not change expression. "You'd so like a rusalka," the Witcher continued calmly, "that you could deceive anyone. All the more, you're a rare bird, black-haired one. But horses are never mistaken. They recognize creatures like you instinctively and perfectly. What are you? I think you're a mula or an alpor. An ordinary vampire couldn't come out in the sun." The corner of the pale lips quivered and turned up a little. "Nivellen attracted you with that shape of his, didn't he? You evoked his dreams. I can guess what sort of dreams they were, and I pity him." The creature didn't move. "You like birds," continued the Witcher, "but that doesn't stop you from biting the necks of people of both sexes, does it? You and Nivellen, indeed, what a beautiful couple you'd make. A monster and a vampire, ruler of a forest castle. You dominate the whole area in a flash, you, eternally thirsty for blood, and he, your guardian, a murderer at your service, a blind tool. But first, he had to become a true monster, not a human being in a monster's mask." The huge black eyes narrowed. "Where is he, black-haired one? You were singing, so you've drunk some blood. You've taken the ultimate measure, which means you haven't managed to enslave his mind. Am I right?" The black tressed head nodded slightly, and the corners of the mouth turned up even more. The tiny little face took on an eerie expression. "No doubt you consider yourself the lady of this manor now." A nod, this time clearer. "Are you a mula?" Slow shake of the head. The hiss which reverberated through his bones could have only come from the pale, ghastly, smiling lips, although the Witcher didn't see them move. "Alpor?" "Nile." The Witcher backed away and clasped the hilt of his sword tighter. "That means you're The corner of the lips started to turn up higher and higher. The lips flew open. "A bruxa!" the Witcher shouted, throwing himself towards the fountain. From behind the pale lips glistened white, spiky fangs. The vampire jumped up, arched her back like a leopard, and screamed. The wave of sound hit the Witcher like a battering ram, depriving him of breath, crushing his ribs, piercing his ears and brains with the thorns of pain. Lying backwards, he just managed to cross his wrist in the sign of Helitrap. The spell cushioned some of the impact, but even so, the world grew dark, and the reminder of his breath burst from his lungs in a groan. On the dolphin's back, in the stone circle of the dried-up fountain where a Dianity girl in a white dress had just sat a moment ago, an enormous black bat flattened its glossy body, opening its long, narrow jaws wide and revealing a row of needle-like teeth. The membranous wings spread wide and flapped silently, and the creature charged at the Witcher like an arrow fired from a crossbow. Geralt, with the metallic taste of blood in his mouth, shouted a spell and drew his hand, fingers spread in the sign of Quen out in front of him. The bat, hissing, turned abruptly and then chuckled and veered up into the air before diving down vertically, straight at the nape of the Witcher's neck. Geralt jumped aside, slashed, and missed. The bat smoothly, gracefully drew in a wing, circled around him, and attacked anew, opening its eyeless, toothed snout wide. Geralt waited, sword held in both hands, always pointed in the creature's direction. At the last moment, he jumped, not to the side, but forward, dealing a swinging cut which made the air howl. He missed. It was so unexpected that he lost his rhythm and dodged a fraction of a second too late. He felt the beast's talon tear his cheek, and the damp, velvety wing slapped against his neck. Curled up on the spot, transferred the weight of his body to his right leg and slashed backwards, sharply, missing the amazingly agile creature. The bat beat its wings, soared up, and glided towards the fountain. The bruxa howled piercingly, modulating her voice in a macabre tune, glared at the Witcher with the eyes full of hatred, and screamed again. "Shout, vampire!" he growled, wiping the blood from his cheek. "Scream your guts out, lose your strength, and then I'll slash your pretty little head off."
You will be the first to grow weak, sorcerer. I will kill you.
The bruxa's lip didn't move, but the Witcher heard the words clearly. They resounded in his mind, echoing and reverberating as if underwater. "We shall see," he muttered through his teeth as he walked, bent over, in the direction of the fountain.
I will kill you. I'll kill you. I'll kill you.
"We shall see."
Marina!
Nivellen, his head hanging low and both hands clinging to the doorframe, stumbled from the mansion. He staggered towards the fountain, waving his paws unsteadily. Blood stained the cuff of his tunic.
Marina!
He roared again. The bruxa jerked her head in his direction. Geralt, raising his sword to strike, jumped towards her, but the vampire's reaction was much faster. A sharp scream and another shockwave knocked the Witcher from his feet. He tumbled onto his back and scraped against the gravel path. The bruxa arched and tensed to jump, her fangs flashing like daggers. Nivellen, spreading his paws like a bear, tried to grab her, but she screamed straight into his face, throwing him back against the wooden scaffolding under the wall, which broke with a sharp crash and buried him beneath a stack of timber. Geralt was already on his feet, running, tracing a semicircle around the courtyard, trying to draw the bruxa's attention away from Nivellen. The vampire, fluttering her white dress, scurried straight at him, light as a butterfly, barely touching the ground. She was no longer screaming, no longer trying to morph. The Witcher knew she was tired and that she was still lethal. Behind Geralt's back, Nivellen was clattering under the scaffolding, roaring. Geralt leapt to the left, executing a short moulinet with a sword to confuse the bruxa gliding towards him. He'd underestimated her. She screamed. He didn't make the sign in time, flew backwards until he thumped against the wall. The pain in his spine shot all the way to the tips of his fingers, paralyzing his shoulders, cut him down at the legs. He fell to his knees. The bruxa, wailing melodiously, jumped towards him.
Marina!
Roared Nivellen. She turned, and Nivellen forced the sharp broken end of a 3-meter long pole between her breasts. She didn't shout. she only sighed. The Witcher shook hearing this sigh. They stood there. Nivellen, on widespread legs, was wielding the pole in his both hands, one end firmly secured under his arm. The Bruxa, like a white butterfly on a pin, hung on the other end of the stake, clutching it with both hands. The vampire exhaled excruciatingly and suddenly pressed herself hard against the stake. Geralt watched a red stain bloom on her back. Nivellen screamed, took one step back, then another, retreating from her, but he didn't let go of the pole and dragged the Bruxa behind him. One more step and he leaned back against the mansion. Slowly, as if a caress, the Bruxa moved her tiny hands along the stake, stretched her arms out to their full length, grasped the pole hard and pulled on it again. Over a meter of bloodied wood already protruded from her back. Her eyes were wide open, her head flung back. Her sighs became more frequent than rhythmic, turning into a ruckling wheeze. Geralt stood, but fascinated by the scene, still couldn't make himself act. Another terrible, vibrating sigh, choking in blood. The Bruxa moved further along the pole and stretched out her arms. Nivellen roared desperately and, without letting go of the stake, tried to push the vampire as far from himself as possible, but in vain. She pulled herself closer and grabbed him by the head. He wailed horrifically and tossed his hairy head. The Bruxa moved along the pole again and tilted her hair towards Nivellen's throat. The fangs flashed a blinding white. Geralt jumped. Every move he made, every step, was part of his nature, hard-learned, automatic, and lethally sure. 3 quick steps, and the third, like 100 such steps before, finished on the left leg with a strong, firm stamp. A twist of his torso and a sharp, forceful cut. He saw her eyes. Nothing could change now. He heard the voice. Nothing. He yelled to drown out the words which she was repeating. Nothing could change. He cut. He struck decisively, like 100 times before, with the center of the blade, and immediately, following the rhythm of his movement, took a 4th step and a half-turn. The blade, freed by the half-turn, floated after him, shining, drawing a fan of red droplets in its wake. The streaming raven black hair floated in the air. The head fell on the gravel. There are fewer and fewer monsters, and I? What am I? Nivellen curled up in a bundle, sheltering his head in his arms and shaking with twitchers and shivers. He was lying in the nettles by the manor's wall. "Get up," said the Witcher. The young, handsome, well-built man with a pale complexion lying by the wall raised his head and looked around. His eyes were vague. He rubbed them with his knuckles. He looked at his hands, felt his face. He moaned quietly and, putting his finger in his mouth, ran it along his gums for a long time. He grasped his face again and moaned as he touched the 4 bloody swollen streaks on his cheek. He burst out sobbing, then laughed. "Geralt, how come? How did this? Geralt!" "Get up, Nivellen. Get up and come along. I've got some medication in my saddlebags. We both need it." "I've no longer got... I haven't, have I? Geralt, why?" The Witcher helped him get up, trying not to look at the tiny hand, so pale as to be transparent, clenched around the pole stuck between the small breasts which were now plastered with a red fabric. Nivellen kept touching his face with his free hand. "Incredible, Geralt! After so many years! How is it possible?" "There's a grain of truth in every fairy tale," said the Witcher quietly. "Love and blood, they both possess a mighty power. Wizards and learned men have been racking their brains over this for years, but they haven't arrived at anything except that... That what, Geralt? It has to be true love.